Hi there, welcome back. If you're new, welcome to the channel. Hope you come back for more. In this video, we're going to be talking about purchasing a new to you used SeaDoo jet ski. It's actually two videos. This one's going to be about the finances and the purchasing cost aspect of it. And the other video is going to be about after you purchase it, what do you do then? And that's also very important. And the goal of both of these videos is to get you on a machine in the water that is reliable and avoid a lot of the frustration and unnecessary expenses and things like that. So this video is we're going to go over, overall cost for a machine. We're going to talk about some purchasing scenarios. We're going to talk about on-site diagnostics when you actually go to look at the machine before you purchase it. Most importantly is how to do a compression test. Okay, so let's get right into it. The biggest question probably on your mind is, well, how much are one of these things going to cost? So we are talking about the years from 95 to 99. I would say 96 to 99, but I'm including 95. But in those years, carbureted SeaDoo two strokes are the ones that we're talking about. And on average, just in general, and this is fair market, fair price for these machines. These are, I'm not talking about barn finds, relatives gifting something to you, nice neighbors, things like that. This is just straight up, fair price for these. Generally, overall, about $1,500 to $2,000 is what you should expect to pay. Now, what does that number mean? So that's not just the purchase of the machine. That includes the purchase of the machine and then some follow-up work that you may or may not have to do. So both of those together is a pretty good base for what you need to do to purchase a machine and have it reliably running in the water. So let's break a couple of things down. Usually when you're buying a jet ski, you're going to need a trailer. Typically, I like to take the cost of the trailer out of the equation when purchasing a jet ski, because they're pretty consistent and there's not a lot that you do to them. And in general, a single machine, single ski trailer is about $500. So give or take 50, 100 bucks, something like that, but usually $500. If it's a double trailer, $1,000, right? Easy peasy. So when you see the price of a machine and you're wondering if it's too much, subtract the price of the trailer out of it if that's offered with it, and then that narrows it down to just the machine itself. So just the machine itself is what I'm talking about here when I say $1,500 to $2,000. Now, the good news about this though is that $2,000 sounds like a lot, and it sort of is, but it also means that that's about the most that you're going to pay, maybe a little bit more. These are not money pits. You're not going to spend $3,500, $4,000, on and on. There's an end to the madness. So even if you do some of the most expensive repairs on them, which is rebuilding the engine or having the engine rebuilt, you don't go much beyond $2,000, $2,500. So just keep that in mind. So a couple of things when you're talking about a jet ski, there's the price of the machine, but then there's some significant repairs, and some of these are normal upgrades that you do, and some of them are unexpected things. The most expensive one is rebuilding the engine. These engines are really two parts, top end, bottom end. Top end is pistons, cylinders, and bottom end is mostly the crankshaft. So rebuilding a top end or having it rebuilt, somewhere around $500, a little bit more, depending on if you do it yourself or you have somebody do it. And the bottom end, about the same, $500, $600, and you're typically talking about the cost of a new crankshaft or a rebuilt crankshaft, things like that. But lump them together and call it $1,000. And so I'm going to use that figure throughout the rest of this video when I talk about replacing, rebuilding, swapping engines out of one of these machines. So that's the most expensive one. And then there's a couple of other things that you typically do as maintenance, and the machine you're looking at might not need this right away. It will need it at some point. But there's jet pump maintenance. You know, the pump on the back of the machine. Inside that pump is an impeller. There's bearings in there. Those bearings wear out. Sometimes you need to replace those. Not as often as the wear ring. The wear ring is a plastic sleeve inside there, which helps seal how that impeller works. Very common thing to replace. They're like brakes on a car. But in general, doing that kind of maintenance to the pump, around $50 to $60 for that. So just keep that in mind, $50 to $60 if you need a new wear ring or a pump. There's a carbon seal, which is on the drive shaft that keeps the water out. That's usually 25 to 30 bucks, something like that. Carburetors, most of these machines have 2 carburetors on them. You typically will want to rebuild those. This is after you purchase the ski. You just want to kind of factor this kind of stuff in. It's about 40 to 50 bucks for a good OEM Mikuni rebuild kit, which is what you should always use for these. And since you have 2 of them, comes out to be about 100 bucks. Okay. And this is not to say that, you know, if you buy a ski and you have to do that, you did something wrong. That's very common to rebuild these. In fact, it's almost always the case you do want to do that. And then it sort of tapers off from there, you know, 25, 30 bucks here and there for fuel hoses, things like that. One big one I almost forgot about is a battery. Batteries are expensive these days, and, you know, even for the kind of semi-small battery that goes into these machines, that's about 100 bucks right there too. So you should add that into it. I'm just giving you some basic data points on these things so that if you discover throughout your purchasing process that you might need to do one or all of these, that you can add it all up and kind of come up with what's going to work for you. So let's talk about a couple of scenarios. Let's say that you're looking at a machine that is $2,500, okay? And the seller says, you know, $2,500 with trailer. So right away, take out $500. That's the trailer. You can resell that trailer for $500. So just take that out of the equation and you're looking at $2,000. And remember what I said, you know, our range is $1,500 to $2,000 for a working machine. So for $2,000, I would expect that machine to be water ready. Doesn't have to look good. Might need a new seat on it. The hood are typically faded on these. Some cosmetic stuff, maybe a little bit of gel coat. Maybe replace the wear ring. Might even have to do a carburetor rebuild like we talked about, but I would not expect to have to rebuild the engine. If I'm going to pay that much for a ski, that engine needs to be solid and good compression. And we're going to talk about, you know, what that means, good compression, later. That's one scenario. That's the good scenario. It's easiest for you. The kind of the inverse scenario is, let's say you have a ski for, somebody sells it for $800, again with a trailer. Take out the 500 and you're looking at 300 bucks for a ski. Maybe it runs, maybe it doesn't. But for $300, if you like the machine and everything else, the hull is in good shape and things like that. And let's say that you do have to put a new motor in it. It's $1,000, right? So now you're up to $1,300. So you're well below, you know, even the bottom end of my range. You know, you're not even at 1,500 yet. And so those are good deals. So let's look at some actual scenarios of what, you know, realistically happens. One of them is like the first one we talked about. Somebody posts a $2,500 ski, and you subtract the 500 and it runs great. You know, before you go and look at that ski, you need to exchange some messages with that seller and confirm, you know, does the ski run? You know, I need to hear it run and things like that. And make sure that before you buy it for that price, you don't want to take it with you until you know that it starts and sounds like it runs okay, and you do a compression test. So we're going to talk about that later. That's easy scenario that we talked about before, but now let's say this is a common one too, is needs a battery. So a lot of times people will post a machine, they're going to sell it, and they'll say it ran fine last year. It just needs a new battery and you're good to go. So don't believe that. Whether this person's being honest or not, kind of beside the point. You don't have any way of knowing, and I'm just going to say right here is don't trust anybody that you don't already know. You just have to be a little cynical about these things and get to your own facts and calculate your own risk. So if somebody says needs a battery, that's an easy thing to solve because you can just bring your own battery. So tell them that, ask them, is it okay if you bring a battery? You'd like to get it started and hear it running. If they say, sure, that's no problem, that's actually a really good sign, because that means the seller does believe that it'll run. And, you should believe that that's true and go into it with the best intentions. But if they say, well, I'm not sure it's going to start, it hasn't been started in a while, well, now, there's a lot of question marks floating around in the air. It's not a deal breaker because, you're going to get to those facts pretty quickly. But just be aware that you can bring your own battery, because you do want to hear these things kick over and start. So third scenario here is kind of a big one, and this one is needs a starter. So if a seller says needs a starter, that's a big red flag. And I don't mean that it's a red flag in the sense that they're being dishonest with you. I just mean that without being able to start the engine, you can't really do anything to test it. You can't test compression. You can't hear it kick over. You can't test the spark. And, obviously the starter motor, isn't working either. And so there's a lot of things that you don't know about that. So you should never pay for a allegedly running machine, if the starter motor isn't working. So you need to, when that happens, so what do you do in that case? And this is when you kind of get into negotiating with the seller. So perfectly reasonable to ask for a drop in price on that. Let's say that it's a $2,000 machine. We've already subtracted the cost of the trailer, $2,000, and they say it needs a starter. So you're not going to buy a running machine without it at least being able to crank over. But they're probably going to be unwilling to come down from 2,000 to 1,000, because that's the cost of the engine. From your point of view, they should, right? Because you may or may not have to spend $1,000. I'm just saying, you have to consider the worst case scenario, because you don't know, right? And you don't want to get into trouble. Let's say it's a $2,000. They're asking $2,000 for it. It won't start, but you really believe the person. You could buy that ski. You could put another starter in it and find out that the engine needs to be rebuilt. And now that $2,000 machine suddenly becomes a $3,000 machine. So that's the kind of situation that you get in with these kind of things. So back to this negotiation thing, asking the seller to come off as much as $1,000 might be a little bit too much. You can try that, but sometimes, you kind of have to read the situation, and you might back off, meet them halfway, right? $500. So if they'll come off $500, now you're kind of hedging your bets. If the engine doesn't need to be rebuilt and the starter was really the only thing, then it's a good compromise, a good win-win for you. Otherwise, if you do have to rebuild the engine, you're kind of out $500 more than you would have been. So you just need to hedge that bet and figure out what's going to work for you and what risk you're willing to take. I'm just pointing out that the no start is kind of a bad thing. So what else? Another scenario is, it ran last year, it cranks over, but it won't start. The carburetors need to be rebuilt. that could very well be true, and that's actually a good thing. The fact that it cranks and starts tells you a lot of things. It tells you the key works, it tells you the starter works, things like that. So you can figure out pretty quickly what you need to do in those kind of situations. And yes, you know, the carburetors needing to be rebuilt and fuel lines being plugged, that's all very common on these machines. So could very well be what you're looking into. I wouldn't necessarily ask for any kind of drop in price for something like that. You know, if they're asking for, say, you know, 1,500, maybe even 2,000 for the machine, and they're claiming that everything works on it, it's just the carbs and the fuel lines need to be replaced, that could very well be the case, and you can figure that out when you're on site. So let's talk about that next, now that you kind of have an idea of the different situations you can get into. When you are going to go look at the machine, you need to take some tools with you. And you know, one of them is like a 10 millimeter wrench there. That's mostly for your battery terminals, and you need to take a fully charged, make sure it's a fully charged 12.5 volts charged up battery in case theirs doesn't work, or if you know, like we said earlier, you're going to bring your own battery and test it anyway. Do that. Take a good battery. Take a little bottle or a little small container in some way to be able to put a little bit of pre-mixed fuel. You know, take a little bit of gas, put some two-stroke oil in it. Don't use starter fluid. That's kind of like not a good thing to do on these machines. Even the seller might spray starter fluid in there. I would actually discourage them from doing that and just bring your own. Starter fluid, even though today's starting fluid has lube in it, that stuff kind of has a tendency to want to wash oil, you know, off of the cylinder walls, which can lead to scoring. So avoid that. And then probably the most important thing you're going to bring is a compression gauge. This one is not the kind you want to bring. This one I just wanted to show you is this is your run-of-the-mill, what we call harbor freight gauges. They're all over Amazon, and they don't work. They read really low, and the reason they read low is there's no Schrader valve in the end of this fitting. And I don't have my other gauge with me, but you know, I'm showing some pictures here. Here's what it looks like. And you know, if you notice, the valve here has that little needle in it, just like a bicycle or a car tire, and that's the Schrader valve. It's real important to hold that pressure in and get an accurate reading. So make sure you have a good compression gauge. Here's a tip for you. If you don't have a compression gauge and you can't borrow one, go by AutoZone or O'Reilly's on your way to where you're going to purchase the ski and rent one. You can rent them for free. Give them a deposit of something like 40 or 50 bucks. I don't remember what it is. And then you get it back a couple hours later when you come back. Easy peasy. So take that with you. And that's pretty much the basics of what you need to have on hand. Now, when you get to the location, and you know, this is a scenario where you know, the expectation is it's at least going to crank over, not necessarily start. So with an ICE engine or ICE, internal combustion engine, there's the three amigos that you need to get it to kick over and fire. You need compression, you need ignition, and you need fuel. Just those three things. So there's not really any good reason why on these two strokes you can't bring all those together and at least hear it kick over and run. So typically what you'll do is, depending on the scenario, you know, is you listen to it crank over first. I would not, you know, sit there on the start button and crank it for several minutes trying to draw gas up into the carburetors. First of all, that puts a lot of unnecessary wear and tear on the machine. It's a little disrespectful to the current owner, the seller. But also, you don't know what kind of gas you're pulling up through those hoses, you know, so it might be a gas problem. That's a waste of time. Once you start it and you hear it trying to kick over a little bit, you know, then you can stop and move on to the next thing, which is take the spark plugs out and pour a little bit of that gas that you brought, like a cap full. And when I say a cap full, You know, I mean like the old Coke bottle kind of capfuls, you know, pretty good amount in there. Pour some in there, put the spark plugs back in, spark plug wires back on the plugs, and then try to kick it over. And it should start immediately. And it should kick over pretty much instantly. It shouldn't strain for a second. You know, you've got gas right there on the plugs. It's going to kick over. If it doesn't kick over, and when I say kick over, I mean it runs for a second. It sounds like it's going to take off and keep idling. If it doesn't do that, then the third thing that we're missing there is compression. So you could, well, so spark or compression, right? So you've added fuel. So the other thing I meant to tell you to bring that I forgot was a spark, inline spark tester. And I don't have one near me here, I don't think, but you can pick them up. You can pick them up at the auto parts store while you're renting your compressor, for example. You'll use them, so I would just buy one and keep it. They're not very much, but you take the spark plug off, you put the boot of the tester on, and then you put the spark plug wire on the other end of that tester, and you can actually see a good visual indicator of the strength of that spark. So do that next, you know, put that back in there, crank it, see if you've got spark. If you've got good spark, then you've got two of the three amigos, and the last thing left is compression. So what you want to do for a compression test is take both spark plug wires off, take one of the spark plugs out, take your compression tester, not this one because this is the Harbor Freight one, but your good compression tester, screw it in, make sure you get it pretty tight on that rubber seal, and then crank it for, you know, 5 seconds or so until you see the needle goes up as high as it can. Now, I have to say, when you do this, you should squeeze the throttle wide open. The engine's not going to start because the spark plug wires are off. I actually don't think that makes any difference at all with compression tests, but I have to say that because I know some of you guys are going to comment on that. You're going to ding me on it. But just to kind of rule that out, go ahead and squeeze that throttle wide open while you're cranking the starter. Okay, get a reading on that and look at what your compression is. Do this in both cylinders. So what numbers are you looking for? Typically on the 717s and the 787s, you're looking for a range between 125 and 150. You want to be closer to the 150 side because that means you've got a virtually, you know, new engine to work with. If you're down to 125, it can still run, but you're down to the point where when it gets below that, you're going to need to be looking at least a new top end. So remember, that's $500. What you typically want to see is somewhere in the middle, like 135, 130. Those are really good numbers to look at. If you're at 145 and 150, you know, you ought to be dancing on the street with that because that's a good thing to see. So those are your general compression ranges. The 951s, they don't really read up to 150. They're more like 130, 135. So keep that in mind. But you want to be within that range. And the cylinders also need to be like within 5 psi. Can't remember if it's 5% or 5 psi. But you want them to be fairly close in range. And if they're wildly off, that can be a problem, you know, with the engine. But the main thing you're looking for is low reading. So if you're looking at something that's like 120 or lower than that, then you're most definitely going to need a top end, and that's more than likely why the engine won't run. So what do you do when you determine that the engine has low compression? Well, you're doing it right there in front of the seller, and so it's not just an opinion. It is in fact the engine has low compression, and so you can basically say, and don't let them talk around this and say you can put a new engine in it for $200 or something like that. That's not really true. Stick to your guns on that, where it's at least a $500 and usually $1,000. You can go look at SBT and look at their prices for a remanufactured engine and confirm what I'm saying. But trust me, for a new engine, no matter how you skin it, rebuild it yourself, have one rebuilt, etc., you're looking at $1,000 at least. So what you would do at that point is, let's say they're selling it for $1,500 and you've determined that it's low compression. what you would do in that case is you would just straight up say, you know, I'm going to have to spend $1,000 on this machine. And so, you know, if you're going to have to do that, you don't want to be over 25. So you want to look at, again, get it in your range, a max of $2,000. So if you can get them to come back to $1,000, say, for the machine, which honestly I think is a lot to ask for a machine with a blown engine. I'm just kind of telling you where that line is. You know, $1,000 for the machine, you spend $1,000 for an engine, and you're in that $2,000 ballpark. I would personally try to go a lot lower and maybe offer them $600, $800, maybe less. It all depends on how much you like the machine. And so that brings me to kind of like a final thing here is the what you're going to pay for the machine is going to be what you want to pay and what you can pay for it. So the fair price for a ski is always what the buyer's willing to pay. So whatever you feel comfortable with, I'm just giving you a lot of data points to kind of help you find out where that comfort zone is. And I hope this helped you, and good luck purchasing your machine. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. You know, as always, you can give me a like if you want to. And stay tuned for the next video, which is going to be about what do you do after you purchase the skis. A lot of really good, important information there, so I'm looking forward to that. Thanks, guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.